The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as Princess Catherine sat quietly in her private study, reviewing correspondence that had arrived with the early post. The weight of recent months pressed heavily on her shoulders, though she carried it with the grace that had become her signature. The cancer diagnosis had changed everything, not just for her, but for the entire royal family and the millions who looked up to her with such profound admiration. Catherine's fingers traced the edge of a handwritten letter from a young girl in Manchester who had drawn a picture of her wearing a crown made of rainbows. The innocence and love in that simple gesture brought tears to her eyes, reminding her why she fought so hard to maintain her public duties despite her private struggles. The treatment had been exhausting, the uncertainty overwhelming, but moments like these fueled her determination to continue serving with purpose. King Charles had watched his daughter-in-law's journey with a mixture of paternal concern and deep respect. Having faced his own health challenges, he understood the particular weight that comes with being unwell while carrying the expectations of a nation. In quiet moments between official duties, he found himself thinking about Catherine's strength, her unwavering commitment to her children and her role, and how she had never once complained despite everything she endured. The relationship between Charles and Catherine had evolved beautifully over the years. What began as the formal connection between a future king and his son's girlfriend had blossomed into something far more meaningful. Charles saw in Catherine the qualities he most valued: genuine compassion, intelligent thoughtfulness, and an authentic dedication to making a positive difference. She reminded him of his own mother in her younger years, possessing that rare combination of warmth and dignity that made people feel both comfortable and inspired. During Catherine's treatment, Charles had made it his personal mission to ensure she felt supported not just as a member of the royal family, but as a beloved daughter. He arranged for her medical team to have access to the finest resources, coordinated schedules so she could focus on her recovery, and, most importantly, spend time simply talking with her about life beyond royal duties. These conversations, often held in the peaceful corners of various royal residences, had deepened their bond considerably. It was during one such conversation that Charles first conceived the idea for something special. Catherine had been speaking about her love for the gardens at Anmer Hall, describing how tending to her flowers had become a source of peace during difficult days. She spoke about teaching Charlotte and Louis about different plants, watching their faces light up when they discovered a new bloom or helped harvest vegetables for the family table. There was something in her voice, a particular tenderness, that made Charles realize how much these simple moments meant to her. The idea came to him gradually, not as a sudden inspiration but as a growing conviction that he wanted to give Catherine something that would honor not just her recovery, but her essence as a person. He began making discreet inquiries, consulting with experts, and sketching out plans that would remain secret for months. This would not be a typical royal gift of jewelry or art, but something living, something that would grow and flourish just as Catherine had through her challenges. Charles spent weeks walking through various royal properties, considering possibilities. He consulted with the most renowned garden designers in Britain, studied historical precedents for significant royal gardens, and even reached out to international experts who specialized in creating meaningful landscape experiences. Every detail mattered because this gift needed to reflect not just his affection for Catherine, but his recognition of her particular spirit and interests. The king's private secretary, who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, had never seen Charles approach any project with quite this level of personal investment. Charles would arrive at morning briefings with new sketches, additional ideas, or questions about soil conditions and seasonal planting schedules. It became clear that this was far more than a generous gesture. It was a labor of love from a father-in-law who wanted to create something that would bring joy for generations. As autumn approached and Catherine's health continued to improve, Charles felt the urgency to finalize his plans. He wanted the gift to be ready for a specific moment, a celebration that would mark not just her recovery but a new chapter for the entire family. The logistics were becoming increasingly complex, requiring coordination between multiple estates, teams of specialists, and careful timing to ensure everything would be perfect. The secrecy surrounding the project had reached almost comical proportions. William knew something significant was being planned but had been sworn to secrecy about the details. Even Camilla was kept in the dark about specific elements, though she strongly supported Charles's desire to do something meaningful for Catherine. The household staff had been briefed about various preparations but were told only what they needed to know for their specific roles. Catherine herself remained completely unaware of the elaborate planning happening around her. She was focused on her recovery, her children's return to school, and gradually resuming her public engagements. The normalcy of these activities felt precious after months of uncertainty, and she found herself appreciating small moments with a new intensity. Family dinners, bedtime stories, and quiet walks with William had taken on profound significance. The transformation in family dynamics had been remarkable. William had stepped up in ways that impressed everyone, managing additional responsibilities while remaining completely devoted to Catherine's needs. George, Charlotte, and Louis had adapted to their mother's illness with the resilience of childhood, though they clearly treasured every moment of her improving health. Charles watched these developments with deep satisfaction, knowing that his gift would somehow honor all of these relationships. As the weeks passed, the final preparations began taking shape. Teams worked discreetly on various elements, each group aware only of their particular contribution to what was becoming an extraordinary project. Charles reviewed every detail personally, making adjustments and refinements that reflected his growing excitement about surprising Catherine with something truly unprecedented in royal gift-giving history. The November morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of golden light that makes even the most ordinary landscapes appear magical. Catherine had been asked to join Charles for what she understood to be a routine visit to one of the royal estates, something about reviewing conservation efforts and discussing future environmental initiatives. William had been unusually insistent that she wear something comfortable but elegant, suggesting her favorite wool coat and sturdy walking shoes. As their car wound through the countryside toward what Catherine assumed would be a familiar destination, she found herself enjoying the peaceful journey. The therapy sessions had been going well, her energy levels were steadily improving, and she felt more like herself than she had in many months. The simple pleasure of traveling through the English countryside, watching fields and villages pass by the window, reminded her of why she had always loved this country that had become her home. Charles sat beside her in comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing gentle observations about the changing season. There was something different about his demeanor today, a barely contained excitement that he was trying very hard to conceal. Catherine noticed the way he kept checking his watch and the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth when he thought she wasn't looking. She assumed his mood reflected satisfaction with some successful policy initiative or perhaps anticipation about an upcoming engagement. When their vehicle turned through gates Catherine didn't immediately recognize, she began to pay closer attention to their surroundings. The landscape was beautiful but unfamiliar, rolling hills dotted with mature trees that were displaying their full autumn glory. Charles explained that they were visiting a property that had recently come under royal stewardship, part of an expanded conservation program that aligned with his long-standing environmental commitments. The estate they approached was breathtaking in its natural beauty, clearly ancient but somehow timeless in the way it nestled into the surrounding countryside. Catherine could see why Charles would be interested in preserving such a place, and she found herself already thinking about the educational opportunities it might offer for young people interested in environmental science or sustainable agriculture. The grounds seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, encompassing woodlands, meadows, and what appeared to be formal garden areas. As they walked from the car toward what looked like the main approach to the property, Catherine became aware of an unusual number of people positioned discreetly throughout the landscape. At first, she assumed they were groundskeepers or conservation workers, but something about their positioning and attentiveness suggested a different purpose. Charles seemed completely at ease, guiding her along a particular path that had obviously been chosen with care. The path led through a wooded area where ancient oaks created a natural canopy overhead. The sound of their footsteps on fallen leaves provided a gentle rhythm as they walked, and Catherine found herself relaxing into the peaceful atmosphere. Charles pointed out various features of the woodland, discussing the age of certain trees and the wildlife that called this place home. His knowledge was impressive, but then, again, Catherine had long since stopped being surprised by the depth of his understanding about environmental matters. As they emerged from the woods, the landscape opened up to reveal something that made Catherine stop in her tracks. Spread before them was the most magnificent garden she had ever seen, but this was not simply a garden in any conventional sense. It was an entire world, carefully crafted and lovingly planned, that seemed to have been designed specifically with her interests and passions in mind. The scope and beauty of what lay before them was overwhelming. The centerpiece was a spectacular rose garden, But these were not ordinary roses. Charles had commissioned specialists to create new varieties, hybrid roses that bloomed in shades she had never seen before. Soft lavenders blended into deep purples, warm apricots melted into sunset oranges, and crisp whites held the faintest hints of pale green. Each variety had been developed over the course of 18 months, timed perfectly to reach maturity for this moment. The roses were arranged in intricate patterns that created a living tapestry of color and fragrance. Beyond the roses, Catherine could see herb gardens that seemed to stretch forever, filled with plants from around the world. There were sections dedicated to medicinal herbs, culinary varieties, and aromatic species that would provide sensory experiences throughout the seasons. Winding paths connected different areas, each turn revealing new surprises and different perspectives on the overall design. The scale was magnificent, but somehow the attention to detail made every corner feel intimate and personal. What moved Catherine most deeply was the realization that this garden had been designed not just for beauty, but for function and family enjoyment. There were areas clearly intended for children, with raised beds at perfect heights for small hands, spaces for outdoor learning, and even a charming greenhouse that looked like something from a fairy tale. She could already imagine George, Charlotte, and Louis discovering the wonders hidden throughout these gardens, learning about plants and seasons and the magic of growing things. Charles watched her reaction with barely contained joy, seeing the moment when understanding dawned in her eyes. This was not just a garden, it was a gift beyond anything she could have imagined. The months of planning, the teams of experts, the careful coordination of countless details had all led to this moment when Catherine truly understood the magnitude of what had been created in her honor. The emotional weight of the gesture was overwhelming. Here was tangible proof of Charles's love and support, not just during her illness but as recognition of who she was as a person. He had seen her authentic self, the woman who found peace in growing things, who treasured family moments in natural settings, who believed in the power of gardens to heal and teach and inspire. This gift honored all of those aspects of her character in the most generous way possible. As they walked deeper into the garden, Charles explained various elements that had been included specifically for Catherine's interests. There was a section dedicated to flowers that could be used for the arrangements she loved creating, areas designed for quiet contemplation and reading, and spaces that would provide perfect settings for family gatherings and outdoor entertaining. Every detail had been considered with her happiness and well-being in mind. The greenhouse proved to be another revelation, equipped with the finest growing systems available and stocked with rare plants from around the world. It was designed to allow year-round gardening, with spaces for starting seeds, nurturing young plants, and experimenting with varieties that might not otherwise thrive in the English climate. Catherine could already envision the hours she would spend here, finding the peace and purpose that gardening had always provided her. Perhaps most touching of all was a small area that Charles had designated as a memorial garden, where they could plant special varieties to remember loved ones or commemorate significant moments in family life. This space acknowledged the reality that life includes both joy and sorrow, growth and loss, but that gardens provide a beautiful way to honor memories while looking toward the future with hope. The tears that filled Catherine's eyes as she stood among the magnificent gardens were not born of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude and recognition. This extraordinary gift represented something far deeper than generous royal largesse. It was a father's love expressed in the language of living beauty, a recognition of her authentic self that transcended titles and public roles. Charles had somehow captured the essence of who she was at her core and transformed it into something tangible and enduring. As they continued exploring the vast garden, Catherine discovered that every section told a story about their family's journey together. There was an area planted with flowers native to Berkshire, honoring her childhood home and the values her parents had instilled in her. Another section featured plants from Wales, celebrating William's connection to that country and their early years together as newlyweds. The thoughtfulness extended to varieties chosen specifically for their symbolic meanings, creating a living narrative of love, resilience, and hope. The planning had been extraordinary in its scope and attention to detail. Charles revealed that he had consulted with the head gardeners from every major royal residence, learning about Catherine's preferences and observations from years of her visits to various gardens. They had noticed which flowers she paused to admire, which herbs she would touch gently as she passed, and which garden setting seemed to bring her the most peace. All of these observations had been carefully incorporated into the design. The water features throughout the garden were particularly stunning, designed to provide both visual beauty and soothing sounds that would enhance the meditative quality of the space. There were small streams that wound between planting beds, elegant fountains positioned at focal points, and a serene pond surrounded by benches where family members could sit quietly or children could safely observe wildlife. The water elements had been positioned to catch light at different times of day, creating an ever-changing display of sparkle and reflection. Catherine was moved to discover that several trees had been planted to commemorate specific milestones in her life. A magnificent oak marked the year she joined the royal family, its strong trunk and spreading branches symbolizing the stability and growth she had brought to their traditions. Fruit trees celebrated the births of each of her children, chosen for varieties that would provide beauty in spring and nourishment in autumn. The symbolism was subtle but profound, creating a living timeline of her place in their family story. The educational components of the garden were equally impressive. Charles had included areas designed specifically for teaching children about botany, ecology, and conservation. There were demonstration plots showing different growing techniques, composting areas that illustrated sustainable practices, and wildlife habitats that would attract birds, butterflies, and beneficial insects. Catherine could envision bringing not just her own children here, but hosting educational programs that would inspire young people to connect with nature and understand their role in protecting the environment. As word of the surprise began to spread among the household staff and security personnel, Catherine could see the genuine joy that Charles's gesture had inspired in everyone around them. The team members who had worked on various aspects of the project were beaming with pride, clearly thrilled to see her reaction to their collective efforts. Their enthusiasm added another layer of warmth to an already overwhelming experience, reinforcing the sense that this gift had been truly a labor of love from many people. The timing of the reveal had been carefully chosen to coincide with Catherine's improving health and the family's return to more normal routines. Charles wanted this moment to mark not just her recovery, but a celebration of resilience and renewal that would carry them forward into whatever challenges the future might bring. The garden would be there through all seasons, providing beauty and peace through times of joy and difficulty alike. William's arrival later that morning added another dimension of emotion to the day. He had been kept informed about the general nature of Charles's project but was seeing the completed garden for the first time alongside Catherine. His reaction mirrored her own amazement, but there was also deep gratitude in his expression as he witnessed his father's extraordinary generosity toward his wife. The gesture strengthened bonds between all of them, creating new layers of understanding and appreciation. The children's introduction to their new garden was scheduled for the following weekend, and Catherine found herself already imagining their excitement. George would be fascinated by the scientific aspects, eager to learn about different species and growing techniques. Charlotte would love the flower varieties and the opportunities for creative projects using garden materials. Louis would simply delight in having so much space to explore and discover, finding adventure in every corner and pathway. Charles had also arranged for ongoing support to ensure the garden would thrive and evolve over time. A team of expert gardeners would maintain the more complex elements while teaching Catherine and her family to care for sections themselves. This balance between professional stewardship and personal involvement meant that the garden would remain both magnificent and manageable, allowing for family participation without overwhelming responsibility. The media strategy surrounding the garden had been carefully planned to protect the family's privacy while sharing appropriate aspects of the story with the public. Charles understood that people who had followed Catherine's health journey with such concern would be moved to learn about this symbol of her recovery and renewal. The garden would become part of her public story while remaining primarily a private sanctuary for family enjoyment. As the afternoon progressed and they explored more areas of the extensive gardens, Catherine began to understand the full scope of what Charles had created. This was not simply a garden but an entire estate dedicated to her interests and values. There were areas for quiet contemplation, spaces designed for entertaining and family gatherings, educational zones that could host school groups and conservation programs, and private sections where she could simply enjoy the peace of growing things. The artistic elements throughout the garden reflected Charles's understanding of Catherine's aesthetic preferences. Sculptures and architectural features had been chosen or commissioned specifically to complement her taste, creating focal points that enhanced rather than dominated the natural beauty. The overall effect was sophisticated without being formal, welcoming without being casual, perfectly calibrated to reflect her personal style and the way she approached both public and private life. The weeks following the garden's unveiling brought a transformation in Catherine's daily life that extended far beyond the joy of having access to such magnificent grounds. The psychological impact of Charles's extraordinary gift proved to be as healing as any medical treatment she had received. Having a place that was truly her own, designed specifically around her interests and needs, provided a sense of renewal that energized every aspect of her recovery and return to public duties. The first family weekend at the garden exceeded everyone's expectations. George immediately gravitated toward the greenhouse, fascinated by the growing systems and eager to start his own experiments with different plant varieties. His questions about soil composition, photosynthesis, and seasonal growing cycles delighted Catherine, who found herself learning alongside him as they explored the educational resources Charles had included. The garden became an extension of George's schooling, providing hands-on experiences that brought scientific concepts to life. Charlotte's reaction was pure enchantment, but her interest focused on the creative possibilities the garden offered. She began planning flower arrangements, studying color combinations among the roses, and designing what she called fairy gardens in smaller sections that had been designated for children's projects. Her artistic sensibilities flourished in this environment, and Catherine realized that her daughter had inherited not just her love of flowers, but a sophisticated understanding of how to combine beauty with meaning. Louis approached the garden with the fearless enthusiasm of a young child, turning every pathway into an adventure and every planted area into a playground. His joy was infectious, reminding everyone that gardens are meant to be places of discovery and wonder, not just contemplation and beauty. Watching him race between different sections, calling excitedly for his siblings to come see whatever treasure he had discovered, filled Catherine's heart with the kind of happiness that had seemed distant during the difficult months of her treatment. William's relationship with the garden evolved more slowly but no less meaningfully. Initially overwhelmed by the generosity of his father's gesture, he gradually began to appreciate how perfectly the space suited Catherine's personality and needs. He found himself drawn to areas designed for quiet reflection, using early morning walks through the grounds as time for personal meditation and planning. The garden provided him with a new understanding of how thoughtfully designed spaces can support both individual well-being and family connection. The impact on Catherine's public work became evident as she returned to her royal duties with renewed energy and focus. The peace she found in her daily time among the gardens translated into a deeper sense of purpose in her charitable activities. She began incorporating environmental themes into her existing patronages, drawing connections between mental health and access to nature, education and hands-on learning experiences, and community building through shared gardening projects. Charles watched these developments with profound satisfaction, realizing that his gift had achieved everything he had hoped and more. The garden was not just bringing joy to Catherine and her family, but inspiring new directions in her public service that would have lasting positive impact. The intersection of her personal healing and her evolving public role demonstrated the power of thoughtful generosity to create ripple effects far beyond the original gesture. The seasonal changes in the garden provided ongoing revelations about the depth of planning that had gone into its creation. Spring brought waves of bulbs that had been planted to bloom in succession, ensuring months of continuous color and fragrance. Summer revealed the full glory of the rose collections, with varieties chosen to peak at different times throughout the growing season. Autumn brought spectacular foliage displays and harvest opportunities from the fruit trees and vegetable gardens. Catherine began documenting the garden's evolution through photography, creating a visual record that would allow her to share selected aspects of this gift with the public while preserving the privacy of family moments. Her photographs captured not just the beauty of individual plants and garden scenes, but the joy of her children's interactions with this special place. These images would eventually become part of exhibitions supporting her charitable work, allowing others to experience some of the wonder that Charles's generosity had created. The garden's influence extended to other royal residences as Catherine began implementing smaller-scale versions of her favorite elements in other locations. With Charles's enthusiastic support, she developed herb gardens at Kensington Palace and expanded the flower cutting areas at Anmer Hall. These projects became collaborative family activities, with each location reflecting slightly different aspects of their shared interest in gardening and environmental stewardship. Educational programs developed around the garden began attracting attention from schools and youth organizations across the country. Catherine worked with environmental educators to create curriculum materials that could be used both at the garden itself and in classroom settings. The combination of hands-on learning experiences and take-home resources meant that the garden's impact extended far beyond its physical boundaries, inspiring young people who might never have the opportunity to visit in person. The therapeutic aspects of the garden proved beneficial not just for Catherine, but for other family members dealing with various stresses and challenges. The space became a gathering place for important conversations, a retreat for individual reflection, and a setting for celebrations that felt both grand and intimate. The flexibility built into its design meant that it could accommodate everything from large family gatherings to solitary moments of contemplation. As the first anniversary of the garden's unveiling approached, Catherine reflected on how completely this gift had transformed her understanding of what it meant to be truly seen and valued by family. Charles had looked beyond her public roles and royal duties to recognize the person she was at her core, then created something that honored that authenticity in the most generous way imaginable. The garden stood as a living testament to the power of love expressed through deep understanding and thoughtful action. The legacy of Charles's extraordinary gift would extend far beyond Catherine's own enjoyment of this magnificent space. Future generations of the royal family would grow up with access to these gardens, learning about environmental stewardship, finding peace in natural beauty, and understanding how thoughtful generosity can create lasting positive change. The garden had become part of their family's story, a symbol of love that would endure and inspire for generations to come. In quiet moments among the roses or while teaching her children about different plants, Catherine often thought about the profound impact that genuine understanding could have on another person's life. Charles had given her far more than a beautiful garden, he had given her a reflection of her own worth and a space where her truest self could flourish. This gift would continue growing and evolving, just as relationships and love themselves grow deeper and more meaningful over time.